So we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the When We Fight, We Win, Abolish ICE at the state and local level. My name is Luis Suarez. I will be your moderator for today, and I'm the Advocacy Manager with Detention Watch Network. We are a national coalition building power through collective advocacy, grassroots organizing, and strategic communications to abolish immigration detention in the United States. I'm actually really excited to be able to share space with three of our members. These are folks who are leading the fight against ICE detention and enforcement in their state. And in today's panel, you'll have the opportunity to learn more about state legislative campaigns, national coordination, and local site fights that have closed down multiple detention centers and have freed hundreds of people from cruel, degrading, and often life-threatening incarceration. So for a little bit of background, I know we have a lot of folks who work in the immigration area, but Immigration and Customs Enforcement operates a system of over 200 immigration jails across the country, depriving thousands of people of their liberty. And over the last 3 decades, the ICE detention system has grown drastically, mainly for 2 reasons. One of them that we see is that Congress continues to massively fund both ICE and CBP, and we have our United Dream folks here who we collaborate with on our Defund 8 campaign, and also because multiple presidential administrations have increased their reliance on immigration detention. Today, actually approximately 30,000 people are in immigration detention. So once again, 30,000 people today are actually inside an ICE detention facility. Many of them are people who are seeking asylum. There are people who have been granted a permanent right to live in the US. There are also visa holders and people who have lived here for many years and are currently awaiting a court hearing. Over the last years, advocates, people in detention, journalists, and even government inspectors have documented an extensive history of abuse, neglect, and even death inside the ICE facilities. Leading us as Detention Watch Network and our members to come to a consensus that immigration detention must be abolished and not reformed. This is the reason why communities across the country are leading the fight to end immigration detention by passing state legislation that limits the ability of local governments and private prison companies to get into agreements with ICE. So just a little bit about how we've been able to do this. I'll just continue. Organizers have been able to do this by passing state legislation that prevents local governments and law enforcement, so usually sheriff's departments, from entering into intergovernmental service agreements, which is another word for like a type of contract, known as IGSAs. California was the first to pass an IGSA in 2017 and a private prison ban in 2019. And since then, we had Illinois, Maryland, New Jersey, Oregon, Washington, and Colorado that had been successful in passing their bills. So huge shout out to Colorado folks because they just passed their bill 1 or 2 months ago, so let's give it up for them. In addition, we have other states like Wisconsin, Massachusetts, New Mexico, and New York who have introduced bills or are currently fighting to pass them. On the local level, we also have organizations who have built local shutdown campaigns that focus on calling for the closure of their local facility and pressuring the administration to be able to close them down. This multi-pronged approach on the local, state, and federal level have fed into each other and are creating enough pressure to have our elected officials take action. For us at Detention Watch Network, we realize that our best value add is to create a hub for collaboration, and that is exactly what we do. Through our Communities Not Cages campaign, we bring together over 17 local campaigns to share best practices, challenges, and to collaborate and uplift each other's fights to close down the local facilities. We also bring together states working on anti-detention legislation, where we can support one another with bill drafting, campaign strategy, and amplification through cross-state collaboration. Through this work and as a result of many grassroots organizations, approximately 22 ICE contracts have ended under the Biden administration. And as I mentioned earlier, 7 states have passed anti-detention bills. In a time where migrants are being used as political pawns, and we have Republican governors fueling anti-immigrant sentiment, in states like Texas and Florida, we want everyone to know that we are winning step by step, facility by facility, until immigration detention ceases to exist in the United States. Thank you. With that, I will introduce our first panelist, Fred Sauer, a leader in Illinois who has been instrumental in ending all immigration detention in the state. Fred Sauer is a senior policy counsel at the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights. In this position, he provides technical support, trainings, and presentations on immigration-related topics to service providers, immigrant community organizations, and others who work with immigrants. A self-described recovering attorney, Fred practiced law at the Rockford Office of Prairie State Legal Services, where he worked after receiving his law degree from the University of Michigan. He has also worked with the American Civil Liberties Union of Illinois, the Chicago Anti-Hunger Federation, and the Missouri Public Interest Research Group. A native of Chicago, Fred is the son of immigrants from China and has had a lifelong concern with immigrant issues. So Fred, can you share more about your journey of getting Illinois to a state that has no ICE detention?
Okay, sure. Is this working?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, thanks, Luis. Everyone who's coming from outside Chicago, welcome to Chicago. I think you're catching a bit of a break in the weather. So, you know, I hope the weekend goes well for you. So before launching into this, I wanted to preface that historically, up until about 4 years ago, the ICE Chicago Area of Responsibility, which covers 6 states, historically has relied on a series of county jails, as many as about a dozen county jails that ICE contracted with to hold people for immigration detention purposes. There have been a number of attempts by ICE to build a for-profit facility in collaboration with a number of private prison companies. I'll say a bit more about that, but let's just say that all those efforts got blocked, and I'm happy to report that our state, Illinois, is an ICE detention-free zone. So, how did we get here? You pulled up the slide already. So, this slide is the list of the 11 local site fights that we've been involved in over the last 12 years. And you know, I raised this in part to note that we didn't get here overnight. This has been a long haul. You know, the very first House meetings for the first site fight campaign happened 12 years ago this fall. And you know, it took 8 years after that to get to legislation to ban private prisons, and then another 2 years after that to end the jail contracts. So this was a major effort that took a lot of energy and a lot of whack-a-mole, basically, knocking down proposed for-profit prisons and other kinds of jail contracts as soon as they emerged. I'm not going to go through every single round. We don't have time. But I did want to note that within each of these sites, for the most part, we were able to work with local leadership, you know, people in the community who, you know, for one reason or another, just got really concerned about the possibility of an immigration prison in their community, in their backyard. Some of them, quite honestly, were motivated by NIMBYism, but a good number of folks were motivated by just sincere concern about immigrants, whether by faith or, you know, other humanitarian concerns. So we were able to work with these groups of leaders in these different communities. You know, they got themselves organized. They ran petition drives. They bird-dogged local officials. They did their power analysis. They ran door-knocking campaigns. Actually, this is my visual aid these are my visual aids here. What are the most effective things that folks used? This, yard signs. You know, one yard sign, maybe 2 yard signs are not going to have a big impact, but when you start seeing several dozen, 50, 100 yard signs, particularly in smaller communities, 5, 10,000 people, that starts to have an impact, and especially if you start seeing them along major thoroughfares in your communities, those are going to have an impact. So this one was from the very first fight in Crete, Illinois, which is about 50 miles south of Chicago. And then to show that we can share the love with other states, this is from Elkhart County, Indiana, which is in northeast Indiana. CCA saw fit to try to plant themselves in that community, and the local community said no. And this was a full manifestation of that. So, yeah, again, we went through nearly a dozen rounds of this, knocking down each proposal, getting local residents organized, scaring the crap out of local officials, and ultimately scaring the crap out of the private prison operators, so, to the point where they backed off. The other thing I wanted to point out with this slide is, if you're able to see it and read down toward the bottom, you'll notice that we actually lost a couple of rounds on the local level. We did not take those defeats in stride. We didn't just say, okay, well, the village board in Dwight, Illinois, went ahead and approved a for-profit prison in their community. That only made us mad. We knew that we had allies in state government, in the General Assembly. For the most part, we've had friendly governors who take immigrant communities seriously. And, so if we can't win on the local level, we're going to try the state level. So if we can move on to the next slide. Okay. So we were fortunate in that we've also done some pretty serious work on the state level as well. Meeting with state legislators, building relationships with them, mobilizing to our state capital, Springfield, which, by the way, is a 3-hour drive from Chicago. So, an advocacy trip to our state capital is an all-day investment. But we were able to, build piece by piece various pieces of legislation to limit cooperation, communication with ICE, starting with, actually going back to some local work that we did here in Cook County and here in Chicago, and then building upon that to pass our Trust Act, and then pass various pieces that we were not able to get included in the Trust Act, and ultimately the private prison ban and the Illinois Forward Act were kind of the capstone, the culmination of all those years of work. So, next slide. Okay, so I pointed out that after we lost the local round in Dwight, Illinois, we went to our state legislature and we passed the, this is actually kind of a mouthful for a title, Private Detention Facility Moratorium Act. This is actually legislation that we had tried to pass for the first time back in 2012, and we fell 1 vote short. In the second chamber, but when since then we were able to defeat each of these proposed facilities one by one until we lost in Dwight in 2019. And again, that only made us mad. We dusted off this legislation. We tweaked it a bit to specifically make sure that it covered the situation in Dwight, and we got it passed. Yay. So what does this piece of legislation do? First off, I should note that Illinois already has a ban on privatized correctional facilities. I suppose we could have made the argument that this also should have covered civil detention, like in the immigration context, but we didn't want to take that chance. So we saw the opportunity. Why don't we pass this separate parallel legislation to cover ICE detention and other forms of privatized for-profit detention. So this basically says that no government entity, whether it's state or local, can enter into a contract for the operation of a for-profit, detention facility, and also, the situation in Dwight would have involved the private prison operator paying the village a certain amount of money per person in detention per night. So the village would have been specifically profiting off of people being in detention. And we said in this legislation, no, you're not going to do that. So pretty much after this bill passed and got signed, the private prison operator in the village of Dwight decided, okay, well, we can't violate the law here. That's it. So, no private immigration detention facilities in the state of Illinois. So we were ready to go the next round with respect to the jail contracts the next year, but something happened in 2020 that kind of short-circuited our legislative session. But we came back the next year, and so let's go to the next slide. This was the Illinois Way Forward Act, which again, is kind of the culmination of a lot of the prior legislation regarding police and local governments and state government interactions with ICE. So, so specifically, this legislation said, okay, no county can start a contract with ICE, no county can maintain a contract with ICE. And by a certain date, that date was January 1st, 2022, all those contracts have to be, the counties have to inform ICE that they are going to terminate those contracts. So that should have been that. So at the time, there were 3 county jails that still had contracts with ICE. One of them decided, okay, well, that's it. We're kind of sick of this contract anyway. We're out of it. The other 2 counties, which were the 2 counties closer to Chicago, decided, we're going to sue. And so they filed a lawsuit. They were able to get a temporary block on enforcement of this January 1st deadline, but ultimately the courts basically threw out their case. And that led to the last 2 county jails ending their contracts as of February of last year. So for the last 17 months plus, Illinois has been an ICE detention-free zone. Yay. All right. So, okay. So I want to close by noting that, the last thing we wanted was for all these people being held in the county jails here in Illinois to be shipped off elsewhere and held in detention there. So we also continued on with an effort to try to get as many people released as possible and to, undertake what we refer to as just closure efforts. So, I'm happy to report that, due to a lot of advocacy, both at the local ICE level, but also with the national ICE level, we were able to get roughly, just over half of the people who were in ICE custody at the time that this legislation took effect, those people got released. So they are no longer in detention anywhere. Unfortunately, ICE moved the other people to other county jails in the Chicago area of responsibility, which extends all the way to Kansas. And they also started using a county jail just over the Kansas border in Oklahoma. But that said, though, we still advocated for many of these people to be released, even after they got transferred. So, to sum this up, I'm not going to go through this entire slide, but we still want to make sure that to the extent that people are being held, that there's transparency, there are review processes, that that their conditions are humane. We also want to make sure that when people are released, they're not subject to another form of detention, namely ankle monitors or other forms of electronic monitoring. So that work goes on, but at very least, I think we can pretty safely claim a pretty significant victory here in Illinois in ending brick and mortar detention.
So let's give it up for Fred and all the folks in Illinois who have been throwing it down. Up next, one thing before I move to our next panelist is that y'all are going to have the opportunity to ask questions. So towards the end, we'll have a Q&A. Our next panelist is Amy Torres. Amy was a lead organizer with the ICE shutdown campaign in New Jersey prior to taking the role of executive director at the New Jersey Alliance for Immigrant Justice, a statewide immigration coalition. In their role, Amy has worked with formerly detained immigrants, grassroots organizers, and policy advocates to lead a campaign to ban ICE detention agreements. That campaign was successfully passed into a bill in 2021, making New Jersey the first East Coast state to ban immigration detention deals. So let's give it up for Amy and go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. Thanks so much, Louise, and thanks so much, Fred. There's so many exciting things to talk about today, and I first want to start by saying that what I'm going to be covering in my portion of the presentation is just a very small snapshot of this decades-long fight in opposition to immigration detention. The effort in New Jersey is decades long. It predates ICE as an agency itself, stretching all the way back to the 90s. And I also want to give a shout out to two folks in the room, possibly three folks who were part of that effort, Ruth and Dea, who were on the ground in New Jersey in the midst of this fight. We were all part of this together, many folks who are not here, and many folks that are still on the ground fighting. So my name is Amy. I'm with New Jersey Alliance for Immigrant Justice. We're the state's largest immigration coalition. We fight for policies that empower and protect immigrants. And whether site shutdowns, hunger strikes, renewal protests, legal services coordination, there were many multifaceted fronts that, again, I'll only be able to briefly touch on today, but that still deserve recognition for the incredible path forging they did to get us to the victories that we've had the last 3 years. Before I move on from this slide, I just want to flag that some of the descriptions that I'm going to be using are about police retaliation and police violence, and also other forms of state violence like prison violence and abuse, harassment and retaliation. I want to flag this in advance because I know many of us carry our own personal experiences with that, but I do think it's a necessary thing to talk about in this fight for precisely the reasons that Fred mentioned, is that ICE itself is a very vengeful, retaliatory, hate-fueled agency, and understanding how they use that hate and fear and retaliation as a tactic allows us to plan our strategy for shutdown campaigns and for detention bans. So, first, I'll give a quick introduction to how New Jersey's immigrant detention ban became law and how the subsequent site shutdowns happened. New Jersey had 4 active ICE contracts. 3 of them were administered by counties, Essex County, Bergen County, and Hudson County, and then 1 private facility administered by Core Civic. These jails not only held New Jerseyans, but served as a detention hub for all mass raids and collateral arrests that happened in neighboring New York City. And most of these sites were under like 20 or 30-minute drive from New York, where ICE knew that they could evade media scrutiny and also act with impunity and cruelty that we know are a hallmark of their operations. So, sorry, I don't know how to scroll this thing. This. Oh, no. I don't know how to scroll this. Maybe like this. Okay, that's all right. I will try to remember. So I think it's important to recognize that because New York City itself does not have a federal immigration detention center within the city, and the nearest one is quite a distance drive away, which my colleague Tanya will talk about in a little bit. And so of the 3 county jails that you can see here, they're all within very close proximity to New York City. Hudson County, as you can see in that map, the bottom left corner is New York City, a really short drive to the Hudson County Jail, just like within bird's eye view of the Statue of Liberty, really ironically. Essex and Bergen County Jails, also extremely close, in Elizabeth Detention Center. But this is not just a magnet for New York City, but for New Jersey itself. Nearly 1 in 4 New Jerseyans is an immigrant. We are actually one of the most immigrant-rich states in the nation. People often think about California, Arizona, Florida, Texas, New York, but it's New Jersey that is second in the nation in terms of our immigrant population's share of total population. So these 3 sites had tremendous impact, and they sat outside of the media circle and the media view of New York City. So folks may remember in early 2020, before the pandemic, there was this huge headline story in South Brooklyn where plainclothes ICE officers were pursuing someone for arrest, and they ended up tackling him. Because they were plainclothes, the man's family saw what was happening, thought that he was getting jumped, ran out into the street to intervene, and ICE officers shot the brother in the head. This made, I know it's hard to remember anything pre-pandemic in 2020, but this made national news, and it really was this hallmark story of just how little impunity ICE operates and how they're, working on our streets outside of view and without any sort of accountability. That man was then detained in Hudson County Jail. So because of all the media circus that was happening in New York City, once he was released from the hospital, he was brought across the river where journalists didn't want to go and detained in Hudson County Jail, where he was denied medical care and given very, very poor treatment in his time there. New Jersey also, once the pandemic started in spring of 2020, had the nation's highest levels of prison infection and death rates for COVID-19. So not only was scrutiny turning to New Jersey's role in the national immigrant detention landscape, but now we're also having these huge, wild disparities. I mean, prisons and jails are deadly on their own, and then you add COVID on top of it. New Jersey was regularly ranking #1 for infection and death rates. So there were a few efforts underway, again, decades long in the making, to counter these 3 county sites and the private facility. In fall of 2020, ICE released an RFI, a request for information, for the New York City field office, the Newark field office, and the Philadelphia field office, because they were looking to expand their footprint in the region. They wanted to dump tens of thousands of new beds on the region to expand sites, grow existing sites, and grow their ability to arrest and detain people. We knew that this RFI was coming at the same time that these jails were just getting deadlier and deadlier, so folks started renewing their push to oppose the existing contracts and make sure that no new ones were signed. Hudson County Jail, the closest one to New York, was poised to end its contract in 2020. Their last renewal had happened in 2018. And as you remember from the political moment in 2018, there was this huge response and this huge public opposition to Trump-era hate policies. This is when we saw really transformative midterm races happening, and people started pouring into, then in 2018, these contract renewal hearings demanding closure of the site. They ended up renewing it anyway for a period of 2 years, saying that by 2020 they will close it. But then 2020 happened, everything went remote, and these commissioners started thinking, well, gee, wouldn't there be a great way to start boosting our county revenues again? And they went completely silent about what their prior promise was to close the jail. So folks started turning up at virtual hearings, making sure that every time the commissioners met, that someone from the public was asking them about the ICE contract, and they kept saying, oh, it's not on the agenda today, it's not on the agenda today, it's not on the agenda today, until finally in November, the Monday before Thanksgiving, they placed it on the agenda for a hearing. That hearing broke the statewide record for a public hearing. It was unanimous opposition. Hundreds of folks showed up. It didn't end until like 4 in the morning. Again, this was all virtual. Not a single person spoke in favor of the contract, and yet the commissioners extended the contract, breaking their promise for the maximum period of time allowed by law. So I think as Fred said, it hurt and it stung, but it also made us really angry. So folks started taking the fight to other places. We knew that regardless of what happened with the single renewal, this huge RFI was coming. It was going to squash us like a bug. We can't even shut down the sites that we have, and now we're going to deal with thousands of more beds. We had 2 assembly members from Bergen County, and I'm sorry, I should have given a warning about this slide in advance, who began proposing legislation that would ban the expansion or renewal of existing contracts. All of this was happening as the winter months were getting colder, as things were getting grimmer. Protesters started adapting new tactics. Strikes started escalating across all of the jails. Jail officials were transferring people in between them. So someone would start a hunger strike in one place, then as a retaliation, they would get transferred to another place. So protesters started taking on tactics of holding nightly vigils outside. We also took on tactics of crowdfunding for commissary funds so that we could have people mail us their own depictions of what was happening inside and share that with media. We were also topping up phone commissary funds so that folks inside could actually call one of the protesters' cell phones on the outside. We could take that cell phone to a bullhorn and have people who were detained talking with media directly. So there were a lot of creative tactics that we began using to really start escalating our opposition. But every loss comes with a learning, and law enforcement was learning these tactics too. They started really brutally cracking down on protests on the inside. I mean, as you can see, like everything from physical to psychological intimidation. There were like icicles forming on the insides of the jails, really brutal, tear gas, tackling, all of those sorts of responses for protesters on the outside. And it became really unsustainable for us to continue to take this like streets only tactic for the shutdowns. So when the bill was introduced, it really was taking an eye on how do we stop these beds from expanding so that we can continue our focus on the fight on the ground. S3361 prohibited any new contracts, and it banned the renewals and expansions of existing ones. It didn't address existing contracts, which was a point of disagreement, to be quite honest, both within and outside the coalition. But because of the sustainability points raised earlier, we knew that as bad as conditions currently were in New Jersey jails, we could not wait for that perfect bill and then be dealing with thousands of new beds in the region. So for that reason, it felt the most politically expedient to act on a ban and then continue the shutdown fight site by site. But what ended up actually happening is that the political windfalls from the state legislative bill, which again only took a future-facing focus, had such broad political impact that counties started backing out of their contracts of their own accord. So they saw how incredibly politically uncomfortable it was. Essex County was the first to say that they were getting out of their agreement, followed by Hudson County. Again, less than 6 months before, they had said that they were extending their contract for the maximum period of time allowed by law, and now here they are 5 months later getting out of that very same contract. And then Bergen County, which is notable because it never had an expiration date to begin with, also decided to close their facility. Elizabeth Detention Center, the private facility operated by Core Civic, actually managed to extend their contract in between the time that the bill passed to the legislature and then before it was signed by Governor Murphy into law, which I'll say more about a little bit. Just to quickly touch on opportunities and challenges, like so many other campaigns over the course of 2020, digital organizing was a huge asset. We were able to really build a large tent with huge impact, lots of opportunities for coalition building across faith partners, labor partners, you name it, folks wanted to be involved. It was a really great moment for people to pour into an effort that they felt had real impact in their communities. And it also allowed us to push forward a vision for new legislation, including something that we're calling the Values Act, which more firmly codifies separations between law enforcement and federal immigration enforcement. But there were also challenges. Digital organizing was also a learning for us, as it was in many other places, especially when it comes to InfoSec. As I mentioned, there were lots of protests, there were lots of crackdowns against protests, lawsuits, restraining orders, including one against myself. And there was a lot of learning about, what does it mean to use these mass chat apps? What does it mean to share sensitive information? What does it mean to share someone's real name or not? It was a learning opportunity for us. There was also a learning opportunity around message discipline, making sure that the messages we were putting forward, because we know immigration case law can be a very wonky subject, but making sure that we were the controllers of the messaging and that it wasn't turning into this harmful wedge topic that divided immigrant detention liberation from the prison industrial complex. We knew on the ground that these fights were interlinked and that inextricably they had to happen together, but it also didn't stop people who were sort of well-meaning and taking a little bit of a patronizing approach to who immigrants were, to use really, victimizing imagery or saying, jail is for criminals, not for immigrants. We think jail is for no one, right? And so message discipline was a really difficult lesson for us to learn. And then another challenge was, the Biden administration came in and people sort of thought, well, all of the Trumpian nightmare stuff is over, right? We don't really need to care anymore. We don't need to pay attention anymore. And for folks that work in local politics, it's really hard to re-engage folks back in the fight and understand how their local elections and local issues work. There was a lot of apathy that, things are over. We can get back to normal now, or we can start ignoring things again and it'll be fine now. So big challenges. On that note, like Illinois, we are facing a lawsuit to the ban as well. The Core Civic contract is slated to end this August, 2023. Core Civic, again, the world's largest private prison operator. The world's largest private prison operator is filing a challenge to New Jersey's detention law because they know what's at stake. They know that they can expand the footprint in New Jersey. They know that that means more money for them. And they filed a suit to challenge the law so that they can continue to extend their contract beyond August 2023. And we've learned that the Biden administration may be joining their side. So the Biden administration, who came to our communities, who came to our bodegas, who came to our community fairs, who promised us this, that, and the other on immigration, is now joining the side of the world's largest private prison operator to say, actually, yeah, let's just continue ICE detention for as long as our private partners want. So we would love if you take action. You can also just follow the hashtag #ShutdownEDC. There's a lot of work happening online and across the state. And you can also stay in touch with us, NJAIJ or hashtag NJ4All. We have a lot of action alerts. We also have a really fun resource hub with some learnings and toolkits from the campaign. If you have toolkits from your campaign and you want to see them on the resource hub, you can let us know. But thank you. That's my time.
Thank you so much, Amy. And I also wanted to share that there were legal challenges in California. So for the private prison ban in California, we also saw a ruling that was not in favor of our bill. And then in Illinois as well, there was legal challenges from the county, as Fred mentioned. Up next, we have Tania Matos. Tania Matos is an Aymara descendant, Bolivian-born Queens, New York-based organizer, activist, and policy advocate with over 13 years of experience. She's the founding member of the Abolish ICE New York, New Jersey coalition, which was started in 2018 to support ongoing organizing to end ICE detention in both states. Tania was a DACA recipient from 2012 to 2019. She draws inspiration from her cultural heritage and Queens upbringing, fueling her unwavering commitment to organizing, fostering leadership, and striving for freedom within all impacted communities. So Tania, let's give it up for Tania and pass it over to you.
Great, thank you. Hi, everybody. Hello. Hello, can you hear me? Yep. Okay. Thank you so much for taking time to come to this session. You know, we can talk for hours and hours about our fights. So, you know, please, we have 10 minutes to talk to you about this stuff. So if I go fast, please stop me afterwards to talk a little bit more in detail about some portions. So as was stated, okay, that's my slide. Okay, so we have a bill right now called New York Dignity, Not Detention, and it emerged from the Abolish ICE New York, New Jersey coalition, which I was one of the founding folks that started that, and it really, our New Yorkers' interest in joining that coalition and providing support for people in New Jersey was because a lot of New Yorkers were held in New Jersey, as Amy mentioned. So people from my neighborhood in Jackson Heights, Queens, when they were scared when ICE came to our neighborhood, they would say, well, where are we going? You're going over the river to New Jersey. So that was our vested interest in stopping and ending this immigration detentions. So that's how we created sort of a cross-state collaboration, and I'll talk a little bit more about how that cross-state collaboration is expanding to other states as well. So just background, in New York, private correctional prisons have been barred since 2007, but New York Dignity Not Detention was introduced in 2021. And what it does essentially is end New York State contracts with ICE, and it closes any and all loopholes for private ICE detention. We worked with the NYU Immigrant Rights Clinic to write the bill, and they work in collaboration with other states like Illinois, like Washington, to find the best language to really include in the legislation. And we're happy to share all that language for other states that want to replicate that, the same bill. It has unfortunately not passed the state assembly or state senate due to politics. New York is seen as a progressive state, but we have our issues. It's very, very political state. And unfortunately, for that, it's not that we don't have support for this idea. It's just the politics of it all, especially with this new sort of sentiment around, or anti-immigrant sentiment, honestly, from our leaders of people coming into the state seeking asylum. So that's part of the issue, aside from just us having like a pretty conservative Republican right now. Next slide. So I'll explain how we got to this point where we have Orange County Jail, Rensselaer County Correctional Facility, Chautauqua County Jail, Clinton County Jail. Those are the facilities that have ICE contracts, and as well as Buffalo, but Buffalo is a federal facility, which this bill would not impact. But Orange County Jail has the most amount of people. They have over 100 and something people, 150 people at a time. And so that's learning from our lessons in New Jersey and how we really focused on really hitting officials, the sheriffs, the council members, everyone over and over again with just actions and legislation and organizing. We've come to this place where where we have the former sheriff, Carl Dubois, and undersheriff, Kenneth T. Jones. They're gone. We forced them into retirement. They lost their campaign to be sheriff. And so, you know, we have this new sheriff in town. His name is Paul Arteta, but he's said on the record in one of the council meetings that he wants to end the ICE contract at OCJ. Why? Not because he cares about immigrants, but because it is a financial burden to the jail. And this was said in January of this year. When we heard that, we said, great, now we know how to get them. Now we know where it hurts for them, is that this jail doesn't have enough money to provide medical relief or medical solutions, so much less try to fight any and all of these lawsuits that we have against them. Rensselaer County and Chautauqua. Rensselaer, we've been making great progress in organizing with people upstate. New York is pretty big, and I haven't been to all parts of New York either, but we've been making connections with other states that are in the northern border of the United States. And so that's been really awesome to try to expand our reach with other immigrant communities, farm country towns. And so we've been learning how to organize in these areas where distance is a challenge for us. But how do we get to that point where the sheriff was able to say that? One is through people inside organizing and letting us know their demands, right? So really, we think that this coalition that we started is a space where organizers inside get to tell us what they want, their demands, and how we're going to do it. So there was a point where organizers inside of the facilities in New Jersey, they wanted to do a statewide hunger strike. And the week that they were doing it, unfortunately, was the January 6 happenings in D.C., so it didn't get a lot of media attention. But there were over about almost 300 people that were on hunger strike in that moment. So they've done sit-ins, hunger strikes, cross-jail collaborations with people detained. We've collected their testimonies. They've kept their own records inside for lawsuits, complaints, op-eds, legislative hearings. They've participated in all those things. All that has led to civil rights, civil liberties complaints, medical complaints, PREA, which is Prison Rape Elimination Act, investigations, federal lawsuits, which I'll talk a little bit more about, New York State Corrections investigations, New York Attorney General investigations, New York City Council resolutions, legislators going to Orange County Jail, and then, of course, the jail and ICE decided to retaliate against us from all of these actions and people inside organizing. So they weren't going to shut down the jail. It wasn't. One day they just decided to transfer people. And so that was, we had to organize in a couple of hours, basically, or a couple of days. And when we got from that transfer, because we want to abide by the just closures way of going about organizing and closures, is that we organized ICE and at the federal and local level to allow the people that were transferred to have their case stay in the region of New York. So their cases were still heard in the New York region. And so there's, so a lot of them ended up getting released. Unfortunately, in New York, the local field office is very conservative, is vicious, much like the New York field office. And so they don't want to give us any wins. And so what ended up happening is we had to push for a lot of releases after people were transferred over. Next, I'm sorry, hold on one second. And then we also are doing theatrical play tours to advocate, because we realize this is very, very heavy issues and heavy topics. So there was a man who was in detention, and he wrote a whole play. And we hired, so this company came to us and said, we can find like a sort of a B-list celebrity to sort of do a one-man show. And so this individual did a one-man show and reciting the play, because the individual who was detained didn't want to read anymore. It was very traumatic. But we're going to do a tour using this play, and we're attracting new audiences, new people to hear about what it's like for somebody to be detained in immigration detention through this play. Next slide. And that was a picture of somebody's food inside of Orange County Jail. You'll see that a lot of people complain about the food, as you all know, about rotten meat. They don't even know what kind of meat they're eating. It's very small quantity. As we hear from across the country, those are the themes that we hear. It's the same thing that happens in Orange County Jail. All right. So. Right, and so, like I said, organizing with people inside is vital to this work. And you'll see at the very top left corner, Miss Q was held at Orange County Jail. In the women's side of the immigration jail. She was eventually released, but she's a fierce advocate for collaborating with us and talking about like what it was like to be held at Rensselaer County Jail and Orange County Jail. and as someone who was held in prison for a charge, we want to highlight those people that have been in prison and have had charges, to talk about how their lives matter too, and it should not be that that just because somebody went to prison, has committed a crime, that they don't deserve to live and not be treated like a human being, and be treated the way that ICE treats them. So Ms. Q is continuing working with us. We have Usman Darbo, Asia Serrano, who Asia was eventually deported to Panama, but she continues to be an advocate for herself and other people who were deported and who were in immigration detention. So we continue to work with people after they're deported as well. And then with folks who there was a situation where people were deported back to Haiti, and people like Cosecha or organizations like Cosecha continued to work with them because when they were deported to Haiti because of the political instability there, they were held in another detention facility there, and so they had to be advocating on a transnational level. And so that was the first experience we had with that, but we were able to learn a lot, and eventually they were released through, I believe, bribery, but these individuals, are trying to rebuild their lives, and we continue to support them outside of this work. And then I feel like we made a really big impact in when people would call us, we would we would record them, we would voice record them, and they would make a statement on behalf of the other folks. And so at the bottom, if you go to our page, our Instagram page, and you'll see these purple sort of images, you can hit play and you can hear the voices of people talking about, in English and Spanish and French, talking about what it's like to be in detention and what are their demands. And I feel like that when you hear somebody's voice and the fear and the anger and the anguish in their voice, people move. So, that was one way that we were able to organize with people inside and get their demands out. Next slide. Then, the opportunities that we had so far, and I think that the coalition has served, and this space has served, is that it's provided a space where people detained can tap into to use for exposing conditions and their eventual release, and to receive support. As you'll see from the image there, Orange County Jail, we found out that a lot of one of the sheriffs and a couple of the guards, they're former or current oath keepers, and oath keepers is a white supremacist group, and so these are the individuals that are guarding the jail, and it was an opportunity for us to also try to think about and advocate for other people inside of the jail, not just the immigration facility, right? Because if they're treating people with such hate in their heart for immigrants, they're treating other people in the facility with the same amount of hate and treatment that they do. So again, another opportunity is like just the statewide and cross-state collaboration, which we did with New Jersey, and now we're doing the same with Pennsylvania, because a lot of the folks that are being there's some people that are being transferred to Moshannon, Pennsylvania, and so we're going to be working with. I'm here to make connections with Philadelphia folks. So if Philadelphia folks are here, I would love to talk to you and do some cross-state collaboration, or Pennsylvania folks outside of Philadelphia. And this is, I think we've built a narrative for prison abolition and liberation for people, little by little, action by action, slowly but surely. We want to present this idea of abolition. Because when we talk to people inside, they may not understand like the academic sense of abolition, but what they tell us, these places should not exist. I wouldn't wish this upon my worst enemy. They treat us like worse than animals, and these places should not exist. And so for me, that's an indication that we have to continue to work towards abolition and liberation. Next slide. And yeah, so if you'd like to get in contact with us, please do so. You have our Twitter and Instagram. You can go to our website, NewYorkDegrading.detention.org. And yeah, we're happy to answer any questions moving forward. Thank you.
So let's give it up one more time for all of our panelists for sharing some of the work that they're involved in. As I mentioned, we are winning. 7 states have passed anti-detention legislation, but there are other states that are continuing to fight, like Massachusetts, New Mexico. And if you're part of an immigrant statewide coalition and you're interested in being part of a working group, we meet on a quarterly basis. And once again, we get together to share best practices, talk about our challenges, provide each other with information on bill drafting. Hit us up at the end of the panel, and we can go ahead and include you into that working group. So now I am going to open it up for questions. We are a little tight on time, so we'll take 3 questions from folks. So does anybody have a question?
So we don't have their official filing yet, but we know that there's going to be a move for them to join the core civic case. I do think it's important, as in across all of these different efforts, is that detention is not a necessity of hearing your immigration case, and the reliance or the false narrative that you need to detain someone in order to hear their immigration case is just absolutely bogus. And so, we don't know what they're going to say, and I really encourage folks to get involved with Abolish ICE New York, New Jersey, get involved with the Alliance, and understand what the tactics are going to be going forward. But we know they've done something similar in California. The Biden administration also joined the California case. And I know that many of our folks are working with other states that have faced lawsuits to sort of understand what the defense should be.
Yeah, so to expand a little bit on that, based on the California legal argument and also some op-eds that have been placed from private prison corporations, the main argument is that states are preventing the federal government from actually completing their functions. So I don't know, Fred, if you want to go ahead and also share a little bit more about what y'all experience in terms of your legal challenge here.
Yeah, the counties here in Illinois raised a similar argument, but I think we were able to beat them back in large part because of the way that our bill was written. So it's pretty clear that states are able to regulate their own political subdivisions, whether it's counties or villages or what have you. And so our bills do that. They regulate what counties are able to do, what towns, villages, cities are able to do, and that was our hook in being able to bar those political subdivisions from entering into those contracts with ICE, or for that matter, with a private prison operator. And I understand that that's a little bit different from the way that at very least the California law is written.
Thank you, Amy and Fred.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Nicole's going to be coming around with the mic. Okay.
There we go.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cheryl. I also go by Cherito. I'm the Political and Advocacy Director with Mi Familia Vota in the state of Arizona. We're in 7 states. And I have a lot of questions, but I guess my first question for now is, what resources are there for people once they are released from detention to help them cope with the PTSD, CPTSD, and other traumas that they are overcoming, and then living in this environment with that fear? Like, what resources are out there?
I can answer. Well, I mean,
I can answer.
go ahead, Tanya.
So I'll say a few words and then I'll pass it to Fred. But what we've been doing is providing So people who already have been released, and they've been released for maybe like a year or two, they've created sort of a little network for themselves, and they've been helping each other with the process of reintegration. But it also, that brings up the subject of cross collaboration with the prison movement, because there are a lot of resources around the prison movement for reintegration. So I think it's an opportunity for us to work across movements, but also us as a coalition. We have nonprofits, but we've had to fundraise ourselves and providing tools for people who have been released. Money, money, and to pay for their phone bills, et cetera. So financially, we're able to support them and find them housing, et cetera. But it's taken us to do grassroots fundraising.
And just speaking of what's happening here in Illinois, we're very fortunate in that over the last 15 years or so, we've had an organization called ICDI. They recently changed their name. They're now known as the Illinois Community for Displaced Immigrants. But they began as basically a visitation program for people who are in immigration detention at the county jails. But they branched out into a number of different areas, and specifically, when ICDI volunteers would speak with people and minister to people at the jails, they develop relationships. And so when people would get released, they would try to contact ICDI. There's actually one very sad story of a woman who was released who had no place to go. And unfortunately, within the next 48 hours, she was found dead under a bridge. So that motivated ICDI to venture into more wraparound services for people who are released from detention, and specifically to provide shelter services and other forms of care. If you want more information about ICDI, it's icdichicago.org. I happen to be a founding board member, and I'm still in the board of ICDI, and I love talking about ICDI and their work.
And we're 5 minutes past time, so with that, we'll end our panel for today. If y'all can give it up for our amazing panelists. We'll stick around outside in the lobby if anybody has any questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.